30, can we go ahead and start the meeting, please, for the Capital Programs Committee? I'd like to open the meeting, and first order of business is to check in, please. Oh. We good? All right. 6 present. All right. First item on the agenda is approval of the October 28th Planning and Capital Programs Committee meetings. Can I have a motion and a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, Dewart moves for approval and Bryson seconds. Could everyone, any discussion? Call the question. Okay, the motion passes. The next 2 items on the agenda are related to each other. I will go ahead and offer the first resolution, but we will take questions and answers, and the whole discussion can cover both items in both resolutions. So the first resolution on the agenda is resolution of the Marta Board of Directors authorizing the General Manager to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Atlanta Region Link Authority for a planning study for potential top-end 285 bus rapid transit projects. That will be led by Majeen Renu.
Thank you, Chair Pond, and good morning, Board of Directors. So these 2 items have to do with a proposal to do bus rapid transit on the Interstate 285 freeway top end, and that top end refers to the section between the H.E. Holmes Station and the Indian Creek Station. And so GDOT has a program of express lanes that some of which have been implemented and then they're further developing. That program contemplates a public-private partnership for delivery of some of these express lanes, including the 285 corridor. As such, the public-private partnership would be an acceleration over what it could be done under normal delivery processes by using the public-private partnership. So a schedule has not yet been determined for delivery of the express lanes along the 285 corridor. And as such, though, what GDOT has asked us to do, and in working closely with the ATL, and Mr. Tomlinson is here, of course, on our board and is available if you have questions as well, is to look at what a BRT could be along the 285 corridor, and so to define what the project looks like, the location for stations, and take it to a sufficient level of design so that could be contemplated in the procurement process for a public-private partnership to deliver those express lanes along the 285 corridor more quickly. So to facilitate that in working with the leadership of the ATL, there are 2 agreements, and it's a 2-step process because there's the Intergovernmental Agreement that really sets forth the administration and definition of the project manager, which would be Marta. So ATL would be the administrator of this multi-jurisdictional effort, some of which includes areas that are outside of Marta's property, Cobb County being the obvious one. And Marta would be the project manager because we have the expertise to do this work. The MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, then incorporates the agreement with the other jurisdictions who would be providing some funding to support this effort, and that funding would be coming through the ATL to pay for the work that Marta would be doing. What's important in the MOU is not so much the funding, it's really about the structure, about how we're going to collaborate together on this project. So there are 2 committees. There's the technical working group that has to do with the professional staff between the agencies working together to advance the technical work of this planning study, which includes visioning and planning and a typical alternatives analysis and public engagement and conceptual engineering. And then there's a policy working group that is comprised by the members of the paying members and the regional members of the parties to the MOU, as well as the affected cities and jurisdictions along the corridor. And that policy working group will serve as a forum and a sounding board, but will not direct the project. It will advise the project. There are two parallel efforts that are underway now that are being wound down. One that is ATL has convened for a portion of the project within Cobb County, and then one that Marta is leading with our consultant in a portion that City of Brookhaven has led the effort in coordinating the cities there. So really this is a great opportunity to get in front of a major mobility investment program of the Georgia Department of Transportation to do express lanes along the 285 corridor and to take advantage of that for transit because it leverages the investments there. And GDOT is looking forward to learning about how we would propose to incorporate bus rapid transit within that corridor in general. So that's a description of the project, and there are the two agreements, as Chair Pond mentioned, involved in that. And happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Can I just add that, you know, there's a clear recognition that the municipalities along this corridor were really instrumental in bringing this forward. And, you know, clearly, you know, Marta, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Chris, but I know Chris believes this as well from the ATL perspective, that we will continue to work closely with those municipalities. And, you know, but this is an effort to try and, you know, advance the concept and really keep up with GDOT's design so that we're prepared once we have funding to incorporate this in and work closely with the cities along the corridor.
And to emphasize that point that Jeff just made is that policy working group is the structure in which that collaboration will be occurring with the cities that have helped to advance this idea to this point.
Bill?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very excited about this project, and I have been involved in it now for several years, but it is a collaboration of communities and county government and other stuff along the north end. But and I am thrilled that Marta is taking the lead on planning this project. I think that's stepping forward, putting a great deal of money into the mix to do this, and and it is truly moving forward, as you said, both of you, Angie and Jeff, that it is moving forward because of local interest and local desire in getting this done. And I know the DOT commissioner met with these cities 3 years ago when they first began talking about this. But this planning is essential because it needs to start now, and coordination with the DOT is absolutely essential as we begin to go forward. And because we've gotten in the position before of where DOT gets to their point of they're ready to do something and we're going to forget about you and we're going to move ahead as we go forward. We have to be ready to have this plan ready to do that when they are ready for us to do that. And they're not always the greatest people in the world about making sure that you're doing your part about it. So I am concerned about that. But I have, over the last 25 or 30 years, watched a lot of great projects get planned and then nothing ever happened. They're sitting on a shelf somewhere, and sometimes that's my fault or sometimes it's other people's fault, but it is not unusual for that to happen. And so one of the things that I am concerned about, and I think it's a mistake that we've made over this region for a long time, is that we do great plans, but we don't, at the same time we start the plan, we don't start the idea about how are we going to get this built? How is it going to be paid for, and how is it going to be built? And I think it's absolutely essential that this project, and there are others out there too. I mean, how are we going to come up with the money to do this? How are we going to do this? One of my concerns is DeKalb County. I mean, I've not seen a lot of interest on DeKalb County, and there's 3 projects that I know, the I-20 project, this project, the Lindbergh to Emory thing that I don't know that we're getting a lot of interest in. So I am very concerned about that aspect of this. And I'm not sure who's going to carry the ball for that right now. And Chris, I'll say this to you, that I think this project is an incredible opportunity for us to see how the ATL board is going to function. And how, if it's going to do the job that we all hope that it will do in bringing transit to this region around here. We're going through Cobb County, Smyrna, we're talking about Gwinnett County, we're talking about people that are not part of Marta stepping up to the plate. And it is absolutely essential that these people be involved in the planning of this project. And I don't know anybody, I don't know that I want Marta to be responsible for making sure that that coordination is done. I'm not sure the ATL board is ready to take on that, but that, in essence, this is a good project to find out if that procedure, if that board is going to do what it's supposed to do. And I'm excited about it. I'm in favor of it 100%. I think the agreements are, the memorandum of understanding and the agreement that Marta has with the ATL board are outstanding. It looks like they put a lot of thought. You all have put a lot of thought into doing that. But I really think this is a project that we're going to see how we can function as a region regarding transit. So I'm in support of it. I just am excited about doing this, but I am very concerned that we're not making the plans. It's kind of like building, you know, when you design a big project, sometimes you use different methods to start figuring out how you're going to do the foundation before you start designing well, we've got to start right now figuring out how we're going to get this project built. And I don't know who's responsible for that.
Mr. Dewart.
I think Bill did a really good job of describing some of the thoughts that I have, but I'd like to focus on 3 things, Manjeet. I think, number one, from the outset, we got to set expectations that all parties can live with and agree to. So let's make sure we do a really good job of setting expectations. I should have said before that, hallelujah, we're doing this. So let's do it right. Set the expectations. The fact of the matter is, this is going to be a collaboration of a lot of parties. And so figuring out how to get the buy-in and agreement of each party to what the process is and how decisions are made and what we're holding each other accountable to is going to be extremely important. Very difficult to do, and I'm glad I don't have to do it. I'm dealing with other stuff that's like that. And then finally, I think it's really important for us to have a really, really dynamic and clearly understood public-facing dashboard about where are we going with this and what's the process and how are we proceeding and where does the public have an opportunity to, get engaged. And, we've talked about public-facing dashboards at Marta for a long time, and I don't think we've got one yet, but I could be wrong. So those are the 3 things that I want to bring up. So hallelujah that we're moving forward with this, but let's make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's with a lot of parties coming to agreement on it. So thank you.
Okay. Mr. Tomlinson?
Yeah, I think a lot of great points have been brought up. For me, when I look at this, I see 2 things. On the project side, this is, in many ways, I think, a historic opportunity for the region to, at the early stage of the design phase and procurement and planning for the top end, to make sure that the transit component is being considered right up front. The fact that we are talking about all of these parties, MARTA, Cobb County, Gwinnett, the state, the MPO, or Atlanta Regional Commission, getting that and being there at the outset is critical. I think that, and the work in terms of the background of everyone coordinating, this is something that we've actually been talking about, I guess, behind the scenes really since summer, and is culminating in this being brought before this committee. Now, it was brought before an ATL committee earlier in November. It'll be back in front of the ATL board in December, and it's coming up in various county commission meetings and GDOT meetings. So for the project and advancing it and making sure that we're thinking about transit at the outset, this is what this is really about for that project. But the second part is, and it goes to Bill's comments and Jim's comments, this is also about building some muscle memory about how are we going to approach collaboration and recognizing the strengths that are within this region. This project and these agreements are specifically designed for MARTA to take the information and the expertise and the experience that they've already have and continue to increase on their BRT work with Summerhill and their BRT design, and bring that forward from a regional perspective. So we're leveraging, I think, that expertise and the team that Jeff and Manjeet have built to not only further for those portions that fall within MARTA, but just for the region. And that's the type of muscle memory. Several of you were on the link trip, and we heard different things where people say, well, how do you get started? How do you do this? Well, the answer is to just start, and this is what these agreements are about, it's just starting. So I'm very excited about this. The last thing I would say, I think the dashboards are a good idea. I think where we are on this, it may come a little bit, in my individual opinion, it may come a little bit further down the line. What we're hoping to achieve here is advancing some conceptual engineering and understanding, as Manjeet said, of where these stations may be, some orders of magnitude, building off of the grassroots work that came out of the 7 cities. And I want to give credit specifically to Manjeet. He brought it, as we were talking about these agreements, brought in, we got to fold in this sort of stakeholder advisory piece to build off of the work that's already been in place so that these communities still feel fully involved. I think some of these results will then be something that would not only move forward for GDOT to bring into discussions on the procurement as we look at potential developers, but then there will be, I guess, work products or deliverables that could go forward into a more public forum so people understand what we're talking about. We're actually getting started early when you think about where those projects are, but that's the right thing to do. And we're going to learn some things and continue to improve upon this as we move forward. So I'm very excited, but I think this is historic.
Any other questions?
It's not a question, just a statement. I just want to say thank you to everybody that has gotten us this far, and I agree with both Bill, Jim, Chris. This is an excellent opportunity for us to look at how we can move forward with regional transportation. So I really look forward to this opportunity.
Mr. Mayor Floyd.
Well, let me add one more thing, and thank you all. I think we're all talking about the same thing and understanding the problem. Now, whether we are able to move this forward with those kinds of things, you know, and really make them happen concerns me. And I understand this, that we're trying to figure out how to do something that I'm not sure we've ever really done in the past. But how this thing gets built in the station location, and it leads me to something that I've been talking about for a while, and you all tired of hearing of it, I know, is we've got to figure out how MARTA and the funding for transit benefits from the location and the building of these stations. How do we do that? How do we get access to the funds when the property values around these stations go up 100% over a 4-year period? How does transit benefit from that? And I don't know that we're talking about that with enough emphasis now. And it is as big a part of this. You know, I think one of the things that's key for Marta is first of all, this project, but how we do, the job we do in Clayton County is as big a part of this as anything else. Whether we are able to do down there what we really need to do. And I think it has to do with funding. And not just from the local governments down there, but from the people that live down there, how they're willing to participate in that. And this project and Up 400 is absolutely essential in figuring out how does MARTA benefit from the work that it does and the effort that it puts in here in the funding. So anyway, congratulations to you all guys for pulling this together. I'm 100% behind it.
Any other questions, discussion? I just summarize, I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's very obvious this is an extremely important project. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's probably the greatest opportunity we've had in front of us from a regional transportation standpoint. And getting back to what Bill said, we have plenty of plans and we have great technical capabilities. The issue is the funding. So I think what's important, it's wonderful MARTA can lead the planning and design and should. And this is an opportunity for ATL to collaborate and work with everyone, the municipalities, and figure out a funding approach. So I think the funding approach is by far the biggest challenge and the most important, but it's also a wonderful opportunity. So Chris, you just get the money and we got the rest of it covered.
I think you've heard, you all know my favorite saying, vision without funding is hallucination, but this is going to help us at least identify what needs to be funded, and then goes to that second question, potentially where the stations are. And again, and it builds off of the work that has been done by this 7-city coalition, but now it brings MARTA into a process, like I said, leveraging the expertise that it has to help refine that work. So I'm really excited about this.
Any other discussion? All right, I'll call the question. Could we vote, please? No, we're voting on number 2. We'll come back and vote for number 3 again. The discussion was already covered for both, so.
Tareen, can you sign me in? Or
Yes, we have 4 board members that came in after we checked in, so just Snyder, Blakely, Worthy, and Scott can raise their hand, vote the old-fashioned way. Okay. Resolution's approved. The next item, and we've already had full discussion, but it was a separate resolution on the agenda, is the resolution for the MARTA Board of Directors authorizing the GM into a MOU with the Atlanta Regional Transit Link Authority, Cobb County, Gwinnett County, and Georgia Department of Transportation, as well as the Atlanta region, to set forth the terms of funding and collaboration for a planning study for the potential top-end 285 bus rapid transit project. And that is led by Majid Renew. Now could I get a motion and a second, please? Motion by Durrett, second by Mayor Floyd. Okay, any discussion? Same thing. One is a memorandum of understanding. No. One is strictly, the second one is really is more like a scope of work for the actual contract for the IGA. So any other discussion points? If not, I'll call the question. Please vote. And 4 board members can raise their hand, the additional 4. All right, the resolution passes. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, may I say for the record, it pained me to abstain but statutorily, that's the only choice I get, so.
Gotcha.
But I'm in favor. It was the most enthusiastic abstention ever.
And I just
Okay.
want to thank Chris, and as well as Liz and others, that we all worked very closely together to put these 2 agreements, and it's a great start to what will be a wonderful process for this region.
All right. The 4th item is a resolution authorizing Clayton South Lake Bus Rapid Transit Project Locally Preferred Alternative. That'll be led again by Majid Rene.
Well, thanks, Chairman Pond and Board of Directors. So this is another exciting opportunity here. This one is generational. As I mentioned a few months ago when I went over the Federal Capital Investments Grant Program administered by the Federal Transit Administration, Marta last entered that program in the 1990s. And with the proposal here before you today, we would be re-entering the CIG program again, making a request of the Federal Transit Administration next month. So that's what we have here before us today, the Clayton County South Lake BRT, and a request for the board to approve the locally preferred alternative update here. So we go to the next slide. And so this, again, the recommended LPA, and with this action, then the board would be signaling to staff to go ahead and initiate the process with the Federal Transit Administration, and also go over with the board the alignment for the BRT and the schedule, and just a quick overview of the pathway forward. Next slide, please. So the LPA was reviewed with the Clayton County Board of Commissioners at a work session and followed by a formal action via their consent agenda on November 2nd, where the board did vote to endorse and ask that the Marta Board of Directors approve the updated LPA to include the South Lake BRT project, as well as a preliminary funding plan for it. This LPA process then will initiate the FTA Small Starts grant agreement request process. Next slide. So on the screen before you is the proposed alignment. The various colors refer to the yellow gold color as fully dedicated lanes for the bus. So the bus would operate in its own lanes. The blue color is semi-dedicated, so there may be some allowable turning movements from general traffic. And then the red is, or the pinkish red is the mixed traffic, where the bus will be mixing with general purpose travel lanes. And the overall corridor is slightly more than 50% dedicated lanes for the bus. It would connect major activity centers running from the College Park MARTA rail station to the South Lake Mall, and along the way would hit major activity centers like the Regional Medical Center, and what's more important actually than what exists on the ground today for this project is what it will facilitate for economic development for Clayton County in the future, as Clayton County's share of the region's growth has not been what we would expect relative to its location and population, and this major infrastructure investment would help to facilitate economic development, which the county seeks, with this permanent and significant infrastructure investment of approximately $300 million. The route does include some of our best performing local bus routes, and with the improvement in the infrastructure and the faster running times of the bus, ridership would be about almost 6,000 riders per day on the opening year for this 15.5-mile long corridor with 13 stations that you see on the map there. And some of this corridor uses local roadways and a mix of Clayton County jurisdiction and city jurisdictions, as well as GDOT highways, so there'll be a fair amount of coordination. This is also our second BRT, the Summerhill BRT that you're familiar with. That's it's funded in part with federal funds, but through a different program than CIG, and primarily local funds. So this is our second BRT here. So let's go to the next slide. The LPA, sorry, I hit a wrong button on my computer here. The LPA anticipates that for the required federal environmental review through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, anticipates what's called an environmental assessment class of action, type of environmental document that is somewhere in the middle between a checkbox environmental review and all the way to a full environmental impact statement. So it typically takes about a year to prepare, review, and for FTA to complete its approval of the environmental assessment. The document is prepared by Marta and its consultants, but FTA is the lead agency for the federal government. The recommended LPA from the Clayton County Board of Commissioners included the support for the alignment, support for entry into the Small Starts program, continued coordination of MARTA with GDOT, ATL, and the ARC to advance this project, and also supported the preliminary funding plan, which includes the sales tax that exists in Clayton County and capital funds that are set aside for the purpose of the capital investments that are identified in the 15th Amendment, this being one of the big ones, as well as the other high-capacity transit corridor along the 85 corridor that parallels the rail route there. And there's an operations and maintenance facility, as well as future extensions of high-capacity transit that would be later. The preliminary funding plan does show that there's the ability to deliver these projects, and it includes a mix of those sales tax dollars as well as bond proceeds based on future anticipated sales tax or local revenues, and also federal grant funds. With any funding plan for a complex capital program like this, it is subject to change, and we do our best to forecast what's possible in terms of revenues and discretionary funding sources, and making some assumptions of what can be awarded for those, as well as project costs. And but do expect that funding plans evolve over time as the project progresses toward delivery. Next slide, please. So this is the project schedule. We are there in that big blue box, and getting ready to kick that process off with, again, we will be submitting a request for entry into project development for the Small Starts Grant Agreement process next month. And that typically takes about 45 days for FTA to review once they deem the request complete. And then we would be able to kick off the environmental and preliminary engineering process, which will include ongoing public engagement for the project. The goal is to bring the BRT into operation in 2026, so actually a pretty short period of time between now and then, and we are very excited to work to deliver the project. So next slide is the recommended actions of the Board of Directors. Would be to approve the LPA, and that then authorizes staff to begin the FTA process. So with that, I want to thank the team, both MARTA staff and consultants, and all the stakeholders that have been involved in reaching to the point where we are at today and defining an exciting project for the future of Clayton County, as well as our board, and who's been involved along the way as well.
Thank you, Renew. Any questions for Mr. Renew? Chris?
Well, really just a comment. I just really wanted to commend Manjeet and all the MARTA staff for getting this project teed up this way and having it really on the cusp of going to CIG. And the timeline, I think Manjeet makes a good point. There's, be it funding or even timing, things could affect it, but setting that goal out there and moving forward is going to be really good. And I think there's, MARTA's well on track to sort of set a strong precedent of moving forward through this CIG process, and probably relative to some other projects in the nation in record time. So fully support this and the actions, even though I don't get the vote.
Mr. Dewar?
I'd like to move approval of the resolution.
Second?
I'll
Mr. Chair, I
second.
have just one comment I want to add.
Dewar moves for approval, second Hartage.
Okay.
We had comments and questions.
Yes.
on this still.
Yeah, I just want once again to say that I am so excited to see a project like this move forward in Clayton County. Once again, it shows the possibility of us doing these projects in a very timely manner. I think that's really the key when these things start. How soon can we get these projects delivered so that residents can utilize them? And the discussion always comes up is they haven't seen an example of how BRT operates. And so right now, there's a lot of misunderstanding. But once you see how it works and the impact that it can deliver, then the narrative of us, I think, will change, and we can have more of these projects that will impact our communities and deliver the services that they ask. So I'm excited about it. I'm glad to see it moving forward. Thank you, Majed and your team, for pulling this together. And once again, I'm all excited about it.
Thank you. Ms. Blakely?
Quick question. Well, first of all, I'm really excited to see this come to fruition, so thank you guys for all of your hard work to make it happen. Question about, maybe this is a question for Liz regarding the verbiage in the resolution. So like on the second page, the bottom paragraph, it states that the Marta Board of Directors selects the proposed route. And I wanted to make sure that that was accurate as far as verbiage was concerned, because it makes it sound like we were responsible for actually selecting and kind of like dictating the route that was going to be, that will be planned and constructed.
So I think we're okay because it goes on to say that they're selecting it as the locally preferred alternative, and kind of makes that clarification that that's the action that's being taken.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Liz. And as we progress through the design process, so that will get further refined exactly what that looks like. So this is based on conceptual design.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, discussion?
One quick question. Looking at this schedule, it looks incredibly optimistic to me. Or is it realistic?
It's aggressive but attainable.
Okay.
If all parties work together collaboratively, and there are a lot of parties involved, and namely right-of-way issues and property acquisition are really help to drive the schedule. And so to the extent we can all work together collaboratively and address issues that come up, then it's attainable, but it is aggressive.
Okay, that hedges enough to satisfy me then. Thank you.
Floyd is an expert right-of-way acquisition. Any other discussion?
I think this, just like the other two resolution items, this just emphasizes that public transit is definitely a regional challenge, and it certainly lends itself to regional funding. And I know Jeff several years ago talked, right after he came on board, about thinking big and expanding the system, and again, it gets back to the money. So it's a great project, but again, I think that we all need to think through how we can fund this regionally and not get concerned about one county or the other, trying to pass separate tax referendums kind of thing. So, all right, I call the question. Please vote. And our 4 board members, raise their hand, please. All right, the motion passes. Are there any other matters before this committee to come? Ah, bad boy. Okay, thank you. All right, the motion passes. Any other matters to come before this committee? If not, we'll adjourn the meeting.
All right, we're going to call the Operations and Safety Committee meeting to order. If everyone will please sign in and register your attendance. Okay, that's everybody. Agenda item number 1 is approval of the October 22nd or 28, 2021 Operations and Safety Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Durrett moves, Hardage seconds. Please vote. All right, agenda item number 2 is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for the procurement of removal and disposal of industrial wastewater and sludge from various MARTA facilities, IFB B48661. Mr. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Chairman Worthy, Vice Chairman Abdul Salam, Mr. Parker, Mr. McKinney, and Operations and Safety Committee members. If I may, I'd like to direct your attention to agenda item number 2, which is the resolution authorizing the award of IFB 48661. And this is for the authority-wide removal and disposal of industrial wastewater and sludge. Next slide, please. The objective of this solicitation is to ensure the authority remains compliant with environmental regulations designed to protect local waterways by facilitating the routine removal of contaminants from our facilities. Next slide. As an overview of some of the key topics, I'm going to discuss the environmental impact of this solicitation, the scope of work which is involved, as well as the locations included, and then the review of solicitation and bids to be followed by the recommendation. Next slide. So with regards to sustainability, this solicitation has a tremendous impact on our environmental stewardship. And you may recall during last month's meeting, there was a briefing that highlighted some of the key points related to watershed management that contributes to our sustainability. And some of these key points you can see referenced here with regards to ISO 14001, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, as well as the participation in the Diverted Water Program with the City of Atlanta, which contributes to reduced watershed expenditures for the authority. Next slide. So as an overview of the services, to the top left, you can see some of the undesirable images that we're trying to avoid with this solicitation, as well as the services to the bottom left that contribute to us doing so. And to the right, this is an image of a typical underground oil water separator that helps us achieve the goal. Next slide. So on the typical site here, you can see this is the Hamilton Browns Mill facility on that map, and to the top right, that's the new industrial water treatment plant, and you can see some of the collection points highlighted in red here for those oil water separators and stormwater interceptors. And to the right, this list shows the various facilities that are key components of the solicitation, as well as the number of oil water separators, grit chambers, and what have you that help us achieve the goal. Next slide. So with respect to the bid timeline, a notice was sent out to 13 vendors, 22 firms retrieved the solicitation, and the bid deadline was established as October 20th, 2021. We received 2 bids prior to the bid deadline. Next slide. The lowest responsive and responsible bidder was determined to be Universal Environmental Services with a bid amount of $2,991,900. And while this represents a 9% increase, we did in fact determine that this pricing was still considered fair and reasonable based on historic data, preliminary cost estimates, and such. So with this said, also this firm, well, we established a 13% DBE goal, and this firm did demonstrate good faith effort to meet that goal. So in conclusion, I respectfully request authorization to award IFB 48661 to Universal Environmental Services in the amount of $2,991,900. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Barrett moves, Pond seconds. Any discussion? Ms. Hartage?
Just a simple question. I'm sorry if you covered it, but do they currently do this for us now?
This vendor doesn't currently do it, no ma'am. There's another vendor that currently does it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Floyd?
What are the responsibilities of what they do with this? I mean, what do we put in the contract about where they dispose of this stuff?
A great question, sir. We actually require the vendors to submit to us which facilities they use. We also kind of minimize the list of acceptable facilities that we, in an effort to try to minimize risk and liability, we do minimize the list of locations that they can use.
That they can use. And we don't have any control over those facilities at all, do we?
No.
So how they handle this stuff is their own business, right?
Yes, sir. And we've had some lessons learned with one of the previous vendors, but that encouraged us to have a little bit more active participation in which locations are deemed acceptable for them to take their product to.
Okay, this is basically a trucking contract, is it not? I mean, they
Essentially.
come in, pump this stuff into a truck and haul it
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
there?
Yes.
And I'm wondering about odor situations at the sites where we collect this. Is that any issue?
No, sir, because essentially the contaminants that we're talking about here is mostly byproducts from the maintenance facilities, oil, transmission fluid, just some of the contaminants that we're just trying to avoid from getting into the local waterways.
Okay, and one last question is, we're paying this firm to take this material and get rid of it.
Yes, sir.
Is the material valuable at all to them, or is it just, are they having to pay this company to take this stuff, or?
Yes, sir. They essentially pay for disposal. It's no value. It's essentially waste.
Sometimes these sludge things, have some value to people, and I don't know, maybe the guy that's handling it might have that, but if we're paying him $1 to come pick it up, he's paying 50 cents to get rid of it, and so, but anyway, okay, well, thank you.
No problem. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Pond?
Clarification from Mayor Floyd. Because this is environmentally regulated, there's a chain of command. So there's paperwork they sign on both the front end and also paperwork on the back end to be sure they don't cut corners and dump it in a ditch halfway between the in resting place, so to speak. So that's why this is expensive. They have to pay for a place that'll accept it and take care of it appropriately. So.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes,
For
I have
Mr.
a question.
Thomas.
My light's been on.
Yes, sorry, Madam Chair.
No problem. My question is, what was the primary difference between the two bids?
Dollar amount? What?
The dollar amount?
I think it was.
Was there any other services involved that made a difference?
No, ma'am. They both bid on exactly the same scope of work.
And both promised to do the same scope of work, but one was more expensive than the other?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Durrett?
I just want to say I love onomatopoeia, and sludge works for me. And I'm convinced that we will not be a PRP in the future because of this.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? We'll call the question. Please vote. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, sir.
Agenda item number 3 is a briefing on demand response pilot. Mr. Emery, Senior Director of Customer Experience and Innovation. Welcome.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Abdul Salam, Mr. Parker, Mr. McKinney, members of the Operations and Safety Committee. I'm David Emery, Senior Director of Customer Experience and Innovation. I'd like to direct your attention to item 3 on your agenda, which is a briefing on a pilot for a new demand response service that Marta is planning to undertake in the new year. So next slide, please. So I want to start with what this pilot is and why we are pursuing this at this time. This would be a pilot of a new type of service that we are looking at adding to Marta's service offerings. This would be a new flexible on-demand service model that would function in conjunction with our existing fixed route. And the idea really is to kind of extend the reach of our existing system and focus on what we often call these first last mile connections where people may live close to our network but not quite close enough to be able to get there on foot, and are looking for something to complete that trip. And this is something where I think we've identified a need and have been talking about this type of service for a while, but we feel like this is a good time to move forward with the pilot. As we know, Marta is undertaking kind of a bigger picture look at our larger route network with the work with Mr. Walker and his team. And I think we see this as an important parallel effort, and I think we see this on-demand model as something that could function or be adaptable to whatever might result from that network redesign work. The service itself, it will be similar to the existing Marta Mobility in certain respects, in that it's it's a flexible service. It does not follow a fixed route or schedule, and does use smaller vehicles. But there's some important differences too. In particular, this will be open to a general audience, so there will be no eligibility requirements for this service. So anyone who could use any other Marta service will be able to use this service. And then another important distinction is that this will be geographically targeted on specific zones, and we'll talk about the zones later in this presentation. And this is a short-term pilot, and the idea here really is to gather insight into how this service model could work as potentially part of a longer-term permanent part of Marta's service portfolio. Next slide, please. So in terms of the pilot that we have planned, we're looking at a six-month operational pilot that would start or at least launch to the public in January, February of next year. This is a partnership between Marta and Georgia Tech. Marta will be providing the vehicles and the operators through our existing mobility contract, and I want to recognize our Director of Mobility, Mr. Miles Turpin, who's here this morning. His team will be operating the pilot, and they've been a really important internal partner on this. And then we're also working with this external partner, Georgia Tech, specifically Professor Pascal Van Hentenrijk in the Industrial Systems Engineering program there. This on-demand service model is one of his team's primary research interests. They've deployed this type of service elsewhere, and they will be providing the technology for the pilot. And I should note, this is a very tech-driven service model. There will be apps that are used by riders to request a trip and track the vehicles. There will be a kind of a driver app that operates within the vehicles that directs drivers to their next pickup, and then there's kind of the back office administrative side, which does all the routing and integrates with our schedule and real-time data to have optimized transfers between these shuttles and the fixed route system. There is a grant funding component through Georgia Tech and the National Science Foundation. They are in receipt of a Civic Innovation Challenge Grant, and Georgia Tech has very generously agreed to share $600,000 of that grant with Marta to cover the operations of this pilot. We estimate that the total operating cost for the 6-month operational pilot will be about $1.25 million. So roughly half of that's being covered by the Georgia Tech NSF grant, and then the other will be covered. The other half will be covered by Marta operational funds. Next slide, please. In terms of the service itself, I mentioned it is geographically limited to defined zones, and we'll look at the zones on the next slide. The shuttles will connect what we call virtual stops. So there's this concept of stops that we can place really wherever we want within these zones, and we're kind of going through that process right now to determine where these stops would be. But the idea is that they will be very frequent. They don't necessarily have a pole or a stake in the ground, but they will exist in the app, and the app will tell riders where they should wait for the vehicle, and then it will pick them up, and then in most cases take them to a nearby transfer hub. Again, this is really primarily intended to be a first last mile service, extending the reach of our fixed route. So the most typical use case will be riders using these on-demand shuttles to get from their origin or destination to our fixed route network. The idea here with this level of service is to mirror what we have on the existing fixed route service in terms of the typical wait time. We're not looking to provide something that's significantly better or worse than our existing service from a level of service standpoint. So that means in most cases probably targeting say a 10 to 15 minute wait after a passenger requests a trip, and then when the vehicle will show up to pick them up. For the pilot, we're looking at operations during the day and weekdays, so 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., weekdays only. I think if this becomes a permanent part of our service offering, we could look at evening and weekend service, but for the purposes of the pilot, we wanted to limit it to weekdays. And then, again, for the pilot, it will be our standard $250 fare with transfers, so it will be similar to using existing bus or rail. This is just another mode that riders can transfer to or from. Again, the fare is something that we could consider, reconsider that as part of a permanent offering, but for the pilot, we figured it was best to kind of keep it simple and stick to the current structure. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we are targeting specific zones, and these are the 3 zones that we've identified for the pilot. We worked with our planning office and with Georgia Tech to identify areas where we think there is demand for this type of service, and in some cases we know from jurisdictional conversations that there are longstanding needs for improved first last mile access in these areas. So you can see the 3 zones here. On the west side of Atlanta, we have 2 neighborhoods north and south of the Hamilton E. Holmes station. That's the kind of the red star there. That will be the kind of the transfer anchor for that zone. In Cobb County, we have the Belvedere area south of Decatur and the blue line. And then finally, in Clayton County, we have the former Fort Gillem site, which is being redeveloped as a warehousing and logistics center. And we know that there's a growing number of employment opportunities there, and we are aware of kind of growing need for transit connectivity there, and we feel like this is a good opportunity, and the Gillem zone in particular provides what's more of the last mile, so people getting to their workplace, whereas the other zones are probably going to be more residential origin trips in nature. So we think we have a good cross-section of the applications of this service here. Next slide, please. In terms of the vehicles and the branding, we have developed a brand for this pilot. It's going to be Marta Reach. I've talked about how we're kind of extending the reach of the network, so we feel like this will be a good complement to our other existing service offerings and brands, and I think this will be initially the branding for the pilot, but if we decide to make this a permanent part of Marta's service offering, we could see this brand continuing on as part of that ongoing service. For the pilot, we have 18 dedicated lift-equipped mobility vans that Miles and his team has made available. Those are already being prepared, and the wraps are going on, and they're being equipped with Breeze fare boxes, Breeze mobile validators, cameras, and of course the tablets that will run the driver app. These are 8 passenger capacity vans, so I think these will be well suited to serve this pilot, and given the special branding, it should be clear that these are this is a different service from the existing mobility offering. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about how we measure success. This is a pilot, so I think a big part of what we're trying to get out of this is looking at how well this works and how this could function as part of a longer-term service. So we'll be looking at several things here: service effectiveness, so ridership, how well utilized is it? Are the costs sustainable over long-term operation? In terms of the operations, we'll look at maintenance and safety, and there's some standard metrics that we use there. Access, I think, is a really important part of this, and there are ways, I think, to look at how does the service expand access to opportunities. And then finally, the customer experience. We want to look at the typical wait and transfer times, or travel times, pardon me. I mentioned that we're aiming for something that is in line with what people are used to with fixed route, but obviously we'll want to measure that and see if that's being achieved. And then finally, just overall customer satisfaction. I think we envision doing some surveys as part of this, so that we can get a sense for how well this is meeting customer needs relative to our existing services. Next slide. So finally, I just want to go over our timeline. This is a very simplified timeline, but I wanted to call out a few highlights over the coming months. Right now, we are, as I mentioned, preparing the vehicles and technology, doing some kind of preliminary tests of the technology that will extend through the start of next month, and then at that point, should get more into testing in the field with the vehicles, with the technology all installed. And then I think as we get into the new year, that's when we anticipate the public-facing components would pick up. We anticipate a larger and more public-facing marketing campaign to begin probably early January. There probably will be some community outreach ahead of that. We're talking about going out to the communities and maybe working more kind of directly with neighborhood groups, business groups, that sort of thing in December. But the more public marketing launch will be in January, most likely. And then we're targeting a service launch in early February. Not necessarily set in stone, but that's our goal, is to have these vehicles on the street by February of next year. Next slide. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will hand it back to you.
Mr. Emery, I have a quick question. If someone does not have a cell phone to request it, or if they're like my parents and unable to use apps on a cell phone, do we have an option for them to schedule a pickup?
Yes, I should have mentioned that. There will be a phone, like a call-in option to request a trip. So I mentioned in addition to the apps, there's the administrative application that will be running in our mobility call center and control center, and so they will have access to the reservation system, and they will be able to book a trip on behalf of someone who calls in. So that will be an option for anyone who doesn't have a smartphone.
Well, I am very excited about this. I hope the pilot yields very exciting results. I'm also very excited about partnering with Georgia Tech. I think that anytime that we can partner with institutions across our area, it's a great thing for us. So, Mr. Durrett?
David, I'm sure you're aware that we are going to be launching an on-demand service hopefully in March after we get the vehicle the supply chain all straightened out. Will you and Denise be comparing notes so that we can learn from each other to?
This is the Buckhead pilot with VIA, I believe. I think it's certainly something that we want to keep a close eye on, and I think these likely will be happening in parallel, it sounds like. So
right.
So yeah, that's I think a very similar type of service, and VIA is the type of provider that could operate this sort of service longer term. But we definitely are interested in how that works, and certainly we will compare notes with her.
Chair Scott?
Yes, my question is, what does the field testing look like? What specifically, what is involved in the field testing?
I think what we will be doing there, this is the testing before we actually launch the service, is really just simulating this service with the vehicles, with the apps. It will probably be Marta employees kind of pretending to be customers of the service. So, we'll, and actually they're the Georgia Tech team, the students there and Professor Van Hendendrijk's team will be obviously part of that too. So I think the idea, we may start with doing some tests on the Georgia Tech campus where they're based, just to make sure that all the technology is functioning, and then I think we'll want to do some testing out in these zones, simulating trips that might actually be taken by riders once the service launches.
So it's not actual riders, the testing part?
I think
It's
the
all
testing
internal?
would be more internal. It would be
Internal,
it would be the actual vehicles and technology and the drivers, the operators that Miles' team will be
I was
providing.
asking because of the word field, so I just wondered, was that
Yeah.
internal or
I
external?
think the idea is that we would be actually out in the physical locations where it would run, but I think we
Mayor Floyd?
Thank you.
I saw where Tech is providing the software
that's right.
for this. Is that something they're developing?
Yeah, it's something they've already developed. So this team has deployed this type of system elsewhere. Professor Van Hendendrijk previously was at the University of Michigan, and they actually kind of redeployed the entire campus shuttle system using the same on-demand technology there in Ann Arbor. So it has been operated in a kind of production capacity before. So these apps and the whole software stack is basically ready to go. They will be kind of customizing it some for us, and we'll be branding the app. So we've provided branding to them that they'll be using to kind of make the logos and screen match the rest of the branding. But this software is already, I'd say, pretty mature and tested.
Okay, well, the Tech $600,000, is that actual cash, or is that?
Yeah, that's a NSF grant. So, that will be used to cover our operations.
Operational
and
costs, so
that's-
this software doesn't
Yeah.
figure into that, I guess.
Yeah, so they're really providing the software in addition to the,
Okay.
in
All right,
addition to the NSF fund. So, yeah, no, Georgia Tech's been a very,
And
very
one last
supportive
question
partner
is that,
here.
we heard the other day about a shortage of drivers, yet we're about to get involved in a project that requires, looks to me like 13 to 25 more drivers. Is that going to be an issue?
We're working with our mobility providers. Miles is here, and, different requirements. They don't require all the CDL endorsements that our fixed route rider, bus operators require, and they are, while they, have, I don't want to say it's easy for them to hire, they are in a position to support this and bring on that capacity to run the service.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. It was very thorough. I did have a question about the pilot program. So I understand that Georgia Tech, our partner, is providing the rider or the drivers and the riders during this testing. Presumably, that would just be during the 6-month pilot, right? For the purposes of getting this kind of
Right.
tested.
So, yeah, right now, the pilot is all we have planned in terms of operations. And, Georgia Tech will be providing the software and the technology, and then it'll be Marta drivers and vehicles.
And for future purposes, are we going to continue to partner with Georgia Tech? Let's say we take this on after the pilot and continue to operate this program, or is Georgia Tech going to be our strategic partner?
I think that's a possibility. We really haven't looked beyond the pilot in terms of how the service might be contracted or procured in the future. I think most likely, if we decided to make this part of our permanent service offering, we would need to go through a more formal procurement process to put in place a partner.
Let me add some color to that. I think, one of the reasons that we need to implement this pilot program is really about the metrics that David showed on the screen. So we need to understand the cost effectiveness of this, and whether or not the demand, right? There's you know, I think a small risk, but there's risk here, right? That too many people want to ride this, or not enough people. You know, there's the unknown that's ahead of us, and that's what we're trying to understand. What's the demand, and then what are the you know, what are the costs associated with that? In parallel, we will need to think through, you know, a longer-term strategy on procurement. And while Georgia Tech has developed a you know, a system that we will be using and is viable to be used, you know, and pointing to Jim, you know, they've contracted pre-COVID and, you know, got slowed down because of COVID-19 with a company called VIA. And they're another, you know, a private company that has this software, and they're doing this type of service around the country now. And there's you know, a few other companies that are equipped both to deliver the service in terms of drivers, but it's really the technology, as David had mentioned earlier in his presentation. So, you know, in parallel, we would really make a decision about a procurement method which would drive the technology decisions.
Okay. Well, that kind of segues into the question I was going to ask, which is, do we have to buy this technology? I mean, is this something that we're getting as part of our partnership, or are we going to have to pay for it at some point?
For the pilot, Georgia Tech is providing the technology
Yeah.
as a partner, so we're not paying them. In fact, they're giving us additional funds to operate. But yeah, I think longer term, there likely would be some sort of a cost around the technology to keep it going. But for the purpose of the pilot,
Okay.
they've agreed to support the technology for that 6-month duration.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Can I just, oh, I'm sorry.
Question.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Frost.
I just have one question. That is, I think this is a valuable project because, once again, we're trying to figure out what the demand is for that type of first mile, last mile usage. And I think that's critical because as people want to get to our stations, some of them want to be able to not have to drive to do that. And so if the shuttle can reach that, that'd be great. I'm just interested in how the time is going to work when you start talking about a shuttle picking up multiple people to do this, and making that whole connection work. And then also, I think it'd be interested to talk about how how this light, maybe the light sequencing lights will work with the timing of this, so that these vehicles can get to these stations faster. I mean, I think it's a great way to just kind of evaluate, see how that works. I think there are some other companies that are in this space right now that are making it work, and I like to see what this type of technology is going to bring to make it work better. That's it, right? Okay.
Yeah, and I will say I think the technology has kind of been optimized to really try to make the timing of transfers as efficient as possible, and we kind of in parallel to this, we're working to improve the real-time information and data that we will be feeding into the Georgia Tech system, so it knows where our buses and trains are at any given moment, so that they can try to make that timing as efficient as possible. And with the lights, you know, that's a larger issue that we've had some discussion and actually have done some separate pilots around with transit priority or signal priority. And I don't know if that's going to be part of this pilot, but with this demand response, but I think longer term, that's definitely something that we are interested in general for our buses or any vehicles that are operating on the roads. And so those two could come together in the future.
Ms. Blakely?
Thank you, Chair Worthy. A quick question as far as implementation goes. So after the pilot and after you guys have had an opportunity to review the metrics, and I mean, I wholeheartedly think that they'll be favorable, but have we given any thought to, like, okay, so next steps, like what is that 6 months that we look to analyze, make an analysis and start moving forward, or is that 3 months? Is that a year, 2 years? Have we given any thought to that?
I don't think we really have a specific timeline for that. I mean, I think we'll probably want to go through, you know, a more deliberate exercise around identifying the zones. I think these zones were identified because we thought they're good fits for the service, but they also are ones that are achievable given the resources we have for the pilot. So I think we probably want to step back and maybe take a bigger look at where we would want to put the service. And again, this could tie into some of the network redesign work that will be happening in parallel to this, because we see this as potentially adaptable to that. So, so yeah, I think once the pilot completes, we're definitely going to want to start looking right away at how this could move forward, but I don't really have a specific time frame.
Yeah, you know, I think, as I think about what success would look like for this pilot is, you know, mainly an effort to understand the pros and cons of this service, both from a rider's perspective and from a service delivery and cost perspective and demand perspective. And so, you know, assuming that there's a success and that there's a clear path to fitting into the kind of the broader portfolio of the services we're providing, it would probably lead to an extension of the pilot for the zones as we sort of think through the procurement and the implementation of a broader program. And, you know, it really fits in, and this is, you know, this is what I was trying to articulate to the board at the work session, is this is part of a broader, you know, effort to really improve kind of our main core bus service. And, you know, it fits into that bus service in areas where we have, you know, low demand, low ridership, but a genuine need to provide service. So we are, you know, clearly we haven't figured this all out, and that's why we're doing a pilot, and, you know, this is going to lead us to a better understanding of how it fits into our portfolio. You know, the other thing I you know, do want to mention and put David on the spot a little bit. You know, some of you may or may not know, but David is joined us. How long ago did you join us? About.
It was early 2019.
Yeah, so he's, you know, been here came from a successful effort on the private side and has done a wonderful job with us and really trying to help us, help both IT and now Rhonda kind of help through how customer-facing technology can be, you know, better implemented here. And David is returning to the private sector, and we're excited for him and the opportunity. I'm sure we're going to continue to work with him as he, you know, progresses in his endeavors. But, you know, he's served Marta well. He's been a well-known advocate for transit in this region, and I know you will continue to. I think some of you know the story that David, as a young baby, rode the first MARTA train, and so we were lucky to have him for a few years. And I know Rhonda, who has really built a focus around customer service, and I are indebted to what David's done around how technology can be leveraged. And, you know, we wouldn't be here talking about this type of technology-driven solutions without somebody like you, so thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, and thank you all for the opportunity. It's been, I think, a very rewarding and exciting couple of years here, and I will still be here in Atlanta. I'll still be involved in transit technology efforts, so I'm sure I'll have a chance to work on some of these efforts in the future.
Mayor Floyd?
One quick question, trying to figure out how I'm going to ride this thing. If I'm
Can
in
you
one of
operate
those,
an app?
if I'm in one of these zones, will it take me where I want to go, or do I have to stay in that zone?
Well, yeah, so the vehicles will stay within their respective zones. Now, if you're doing a trip entirely within a single zone, you could have the option of just taking the vehicle as a direct service. I think we still need to figure out some parameters around, you know, is there a kind of minimum trip length that would be required, and we still have some decisions to make there. But yeah, the vehicles will operate within the zones, and I think, again, in most cases, we expect people will be using the vehicles to reach one of these transfer hubs for each zone. So I meant, like, on the slide with the zones, you saw that, you know, the West Side Zone had the home station, the Belvedere Zone had several stations along the blue line. Clayton Zone's a little different in that there isn't a rail station particularly close, but there is an area where there are transfers to several local bus routes. So I think most of the time, this will be that first last mile where you would be using it to get from, say, if you're starting your trip from, you know, your home or wherever you're starting to a station or transfer hub, and then you could continue your journey on our fixed network.
Okay, thank you. It's gonna make it a little more difficult for me to use, so we're gonna have to work on that a
Yeah,
little
well,
bit.
our marketing group is going to be putting together ride guides and videos, and Georgia Tech will be helping with that. So we definitely want to make sure that you know, there will, I think, be a learning curve for all of our riders with this, but we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your service to Marta.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Direct the committee members to their packets that has FY22 September KPIs in there for informational only. And given the fact that Chairman Frierson has an agenda that might keep us here till 5 o'clock, we're going to adjourn operations and safety and turn it over to business and management.
If I could ask committee members to please come to the horseshoe, and let's sign in, please. Reggie, could you sign in, please? Okay, I believe that's it. Okay, I'll call to order the Business Management Committee meeting for November 18th, 2021. Rod Frierson had to attend another meeting, so I'm stepping in to chair the meeting. And the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the last meeting held on October 28th, 2021. Could I have a motion to approve?
Move for approval, Paul.
Mr. Pond moves
Second.
approval. Ms. Hardage seconds. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Then let's go ahead and vote to approve or not. Al? Okay, minutes are approved. The first item of business is a resolution authorizing the renewal of Marta's excess property and liability insurance programs for 2022. Hello, Donna Jennings. Look forward to your report.
Good morning. Good morning, Vice Chairman Durrett, Mr. Srinoff, Mr. Parker, and members of the committee. The resolution before you today is a request to renew the authority's excess operating property and liability insurance programs for calendar year 2022. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. When I was before the committee at this time last year, we were dealing with what has turned out to be the peak of the hard insurance market, where pricing increases were more than 50% and coverage availability was severely limited. Today, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that the insurance market conditions have slightly improved. Bad news is that I expect our costs to increase, however, not at the significant rate we experienced over the last 3 years. In my presentation, I'll provide you with an overview of the insurance market conditions and program costs, and at the conclusion of my presentation, I'll ask the committee for approval of my recommendations. Next slide, please. First, let's talk about the excess liability insurance market conditions. Commercial automobile liability and excess liability markets in 2021 continue to be challenging lines of business. The commercial automobile liability line of business is particularly challenging and unprofitable for most insurance carriers. Though the pandemic may have reduced traffic in general, high-speed, high-impact collisions with more severe injuries have increased, and the 10-year trend of increasing claim costs continues unabated. In response, insurance companies are reducing the amount of coverage they will underwrite on certain types of business, insulating themselves further from risk by requiring insureds to maintain higher retentions and then charging more for higher limits due to rising reinsurance costs. Next slide, please. This graph illustrates the rising cost of claims, particularly litigated claims. From 2014 to 2019, jury verdicts have almost doubled. This dramatic increase in costs is attributed to several factors that fall under the broad term of social inflation. Social inflation refers to all ways in which insurers' claims costs rise over and above general economic inflation, which includes wage and price inflation, medical cost inflation, societal shifts, and other emerging risks. More narrowly defined, social inflation refers to legislative and litigation developments that impact insurers' legal liabilities and claims costs. Taken together, all of these factors have had a dramatic impact on the cost of claims, which directly impacts the cost and availability of insurance coverage. Next slide, please. As you may recall, last year, due to difficult insurance market conditions, we increased our retention to $10 million. Insurance carriers have not changed their position regarding retention levels for public entities with large bus fleets, so our retention remains at $10 million. Our challenges with the excess liability program began in 2018, and the increase in costs we have experienced since that time track with the hardening of the insurance market, where prices have increased for the last 16 consecutive quarters. As you can see from the blue line on the graph, our costs have increased by 153% in 4 years, from $3.1 million in 2018 to $7.9 million in 2021. For 2022, our insurance broker Marsh has indicated a worst-case scenario of a 20% increase in cost to $9.487 million. Next slide, please. The program structure is the same as in 2022, and the layers of the program are outlined here. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, pricing increases continue, however, at a more moderate rate than we have seen over the last 3 years. And the estimated cost, not to exceed cost, for the 2020 coverage is $9.487 million, which is a very conservative estimate considering the market conditions that we've been dealing with heretofore. As negotiations continued up to and continue even now, our goal is to drive the cost down as much as possible. And at present, if we paid the not-to-exceed amount, the cost for the insurance coverage would increase by $1.581 million. Next slide, please. Now let's move on to the excess property program. The property insurance market also continues to be challenged by a number of factors, including an increase in the number of named storms predicted for 2021, anticipated increases in the size of western wildfires, the big freeze in Texas, and a 6th consecutive year with 10 or more billion-dollar weather and climate events. Because these events are increasing in frequency and severity, insurers are increasing premiums to cover their losses. Next slide, please. The current policy has a $5 million self-insured retention and limits of $250 million, and the structure remains the same as 2021, as outlined here. Next slide, please. The property insurance market is also experiencing a deceleration of pricing increases. While this time last year we were looking at a 20% increase in cost, this year we were looking at a 10 to 15% increase, and the cost of our coverage is expected to increase from $1.395 million in 2021 to a not-to-exceed cost of $1.573 million for 2022. And again, as our negotiations continue, the goal is the same, to drive down the cost as much as possible within the market constraints. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the total not-to-exceed cost for the excess operating liability and property insurance program for 2022 is $11.016 million. But now I have really good news, and I'm very happy to report that as of last night, the excess liability program cost for 2022 is coming in at nearly the same cost as the expiring program. We paid $7,906 for coverage last year, and the nearly finalized cost of the 2022 program is $8,028,800, which is an increase of only 1.6%, or $122,000 over expiring. So I'm very pleased with this result, considering the market conditions and the dramatic changes we've had to make to the program over the last several years, and I respectfully request your approval of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I'll entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
I move. This is Hartage.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Pond, second. Questions?
Mr. Chair, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
I know you probably do this, but
Bless you.
do we look back over the last several years and try to project, if we had increased the deductible even more, the cost of what we paid for claims over that deductible? I mean, do we do any sort of analysis of, if we increased that deductible, what that would have meant to the bottom line?
The retention, yeah, well, yes, sir, but we haven't, in the 24 years that I've been here, we've only had one claim penetrate the retention of $5 million. So we were getting coverage at a very, very reasonable rate before the hardening of the insurance market. And, you know, had that not occurred, we probably would not be at a $10 million retention. So, yes, we look at that, but we haven't really had a need to increase the retention because we were getting such a reasonable rate on the coverage, and we had no claims that penetrated that $5 million retention.
Okay.
Any other questions or discussion? If we were to wait for like another day, would it go down again?
I think we're, you know, if we can just get to the board meeting, and I'll bind the coverage that day, I promise.
Come on, manage the risk, okay?
I promise.
All right, then I'll call the question, if we can go ahead and vote on the resolution. The resolution passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the award of armed security guard coverage for revenue operations, IFB B48759. Denise Walker.
Good morning, Vice Chairman Durrett, Mr. Parker, Mr. Shrina, and committee members. My name is Denise Walker. I'm the Manager of Revenue Administration. Today I'll be presenting the resolution requesting the award of a contract for armed security guard coverage for revenue operations, IFB B48759. Next slide, please. Armed security guards provide protection for revenue operations personnel during the collection of revenue from Breeze vending machines, as well as during special events. Next slide, please. The state of Georgia requires armed security guards to be registered and licensed through the Secretary of State's office, and individual guard licenses must be associated with a particular company license. Next slide, please. 7 security guards are required on a typical day, and additional coverage is required for large special events. Next slide, please. The contract covers a 2-year base period with a 1-year option for a total of 3 years. And this is a recurring contract that replaces IFB B40399. Next slide, please. This procurement is being funded with local operating funds from the approved FY22 budget, and funds for subsequent years of the contract will be requested in the annual operating budget. Next slide, please. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion has established a 22% DBE goal for this procurement. Next slide. The notice to bidders was sent to 7 vendors on August 30th, 2021. In September 2021, the procurement was advertised in the local media, procurement registries, and on Marta's website. 48 firms retrieved the online solicitation and/or purchased the CD. The bid opening was held September 29th, 2021. Next slide, please. 4 bids were received at the bid opening. Bids were received from G11 Security Incorporated, Norrid and Associates Incorporated, Strategic Security Corporation, and Vets Securing America. Next slide, please. G11 Security Incorporated, the lowest bidder, was determined to be responsive but non-responsible because the company does not have the minimum number of armed guards, 15, specified in the contract documents. During the bid evaluation process, it was verified through the Secretary of State's website that G11 Security has 3 armed guards registered to the company. Next slide, please. Nord and Associates submitted the second lowest bid and was determined to be responsive and responsible. Established in 1981, Nord and Associates is Atlanta's largest locally owned and operated security firm. Nord and Associates is the current provider of armed security coverage. Next slide, please. To comply with the established DBE goal, Nord and Associates has submitted as a 50-50 joint venture with Priority One Security. Priority One Security is certified as an African-American business enterprise by the City of Atlanta's Equal Business Opportunity Program. Next slide, please. I respectfully request approval of the award of a contract for armed security guard coverage for revenue operations, IFB B48759, in the amount of $775,210.80 to Nord and Associates Incorporated. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We have a request to approve a motion
I move
for this
approval.
resolution. Thank you. Properly moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Stacy. We have a second. Are there any questions about this proposed resolution? Okay, seeing none, then we are, I guess, prepared to vote. Ms. Scott?
Thank you. I was in the process of determining if I wanted to ask a question.
Oh.
I was going back over the slides, but
Got
thank
you. Are you okay?
I'm okay.
All right. The resolution passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kirk, you're up for the next three. A resolution authorizing the award of a contract for authority-wide voice, internet, and data telecommunications services. Rfpp PPPP 49945. Kirk?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chairman Durrett, Mr. Parker, Mr. Srinath, and members of the Business Management Committee. I must be up here a lot if you're just like, hey, Kirk, come on up. So, promise these will be quickly. This first item is a request for approval of award to, I'm sorry, if you can go to the next slide, for award to AT&T. We currently have 2 contracts with AT&T that are expiring in January. This consolidated contract is being purchased off of the state GSA method of procurement, and it will consolidate all of our internet, networking, long-distance phone call, and other voice and data services you can see here. There has been a slight cost increase. The total amount of this contract for a 3-year term and 2 one-year options is $8.5 million. And that will be coming out of our technology operating budget for those approved years. Let me see if there's anything else. I believe that, as I said, this is consolidating 2 contracts that are expiring in January. That concludes the request.
Okay, so we have a request for a resolution authorizing this action. Is there a motion to approve?
I move approval.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Questions? Mr. Pond?
Kirk, are we eliminating something here with, in other words, this contract is taking on some new items, right, as I understood it?
It is not surprisingly a mix of removing some old technology. There were some technologies that we have previously used to connect sites. We're removing that, and we're adding in more connectivity, more interconnectivity, both wirelessly and wired through the AT&T contract.
So the technology we are removing, is that netted, when you showed your comparison, current versus this contract, is that netted out?
It is netted out, but there is an actual, if you go back to the previous slide, you'll see that there is a cost increase because we've got more connectivity needs, right? Over the years, people want more network and more locations. Yes.
Ms. Hardage?
Does this in any way involve all of the tunnel internets and Wi-Fi service?
No, ma'am. That is coming up in the next agenda item.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe that's prescient. Any other questions? Mr. Floyd?
Just a quick question. I noticed, if I understand right, this contract and the next one are under the state of Georgia's contract?
Correct, sir.
Is that how you, so that's, you didn't advertise for it, you just utilized that contract?
Yes, sir. And those were competitively bid. The state of Georgia does the competitive
Okay.
bid, and then we
Thank
simply.
you.
Yes, sir.
And, but I'm curious as to how that bidding process works. And this may be a conversation for another date, really. How does a statewide contract on this service operate? And forget that question. I'll talk to you about that later.
Certainly.
Sorry.
We just got a peek into Mr. Floyd's mind. Any other questions or discussion? Then let's go ahead and vote on the motion. Motion passes. Thank you, Kirk. Now, the next item that you're going to bring before us is a resolution authorizing a contract for the procurement of Wi-Fi data telecommunications services for Marta buses, rail cars, and other equipment, Rfpp 49944. Kirk, we're ready for this one.
Thank you, sir. This is the topic that you asked about, Mrs. Hardage. This is a request to enter into a contract with T-Mobile for the little SIM cards that we put into all of our vehicles that give us cellular connectivity. So Wi-Fi for the bus vehicles, the paratransit vehicles, rail vehicles, and a few other miscellaneous non-revenue vehicles. This is once again procuring off of the State of Georgia contract. It is for a 1-year term with 2 one-year options. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility. The request is for a total of $1,338,750. And the good news embedded in this, yes, here it is on the slide. We're, with this contract change out, the current contract with T-Mobile providing the same services ends in January. With this change out, we are reducing the number of needed connections. There's no vehicles that won't have it, but we went through and we scrubbed the list, and we have fewer cellular connections necessary. And if you'll note here, we're going down by a 59-cent decrease per connection per month. So what we'll see on this is an annual decrease of around $72,000. The 3-year net decrease is $217,000. So this is one of those cases where we're able to better manage the inventory and lower the pricing. So this is a request for the approval to enter into the 1-year contract with 2 one-year extensions with T-Mobile off the Georgia State procurement method for $1,338,750.
Thank you for the request. Is there
I
a
move
motion
to approve, and then I have a question.
All right, Ms. Hardage has a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Worthy seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Worthy. Ms. Hardage.
So as we go into this, and I know it's continuous ongoing, the service within the tunnels has certainly improved, because as I use it, I can tell that. But we still have, or at least on my phone, dead zones. I guess that's probably true for most people. Will this continue to help us get past that dead zone issue?
So it's a deep topic, but what happens is in the tunnels, there's only 2 carriers that have complete coverage at this point in time. It's AT&T and Verizon. They enter into a contract with a third party that gives them full coverage in the tunnels. T-Mobile purchased Sprint, and Sprint had a contract to get full coverage in the tunnels. So we're working with the carriers to get full coverage in the tunnels, but it moves at a telecom speed. That's the simple answer.
All right, I just thought it was important to ask.
Yes.
Other questions or discussion? All right, let's go ahead and vote on the motion. Resolution passes. All right, Kirk, you're up for the third one, which is a resolution to modify Microsoft License Enterprise Agreement B48124.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman. This is a request to add funds to our current, if you go to the next slide, please, to our current contract with my favorite software vendor, Crayon Software Incorporated. I say it not because of what they deliver, but just the name is fun to say. If the board will remember, we entered into a contract with Crayon Software Incorporated to procure our Microsoft technologies for the next 3 years. This is a request, you can see the 3 salient pieces for a total increase to the contract value of $1,274,938 over the next 3 years. And what this will do is it will extend our current Windows 7 support. Windows 7 is an operating system, maybe some of you have at home, but it's reached its end of life, and Microsoft is pushing everyone now to Windows 11, actually. But we were in the process of migrating all of the agency's equipment off of Windows 7 when COVID hit, and it has to get PCs and migrate that technology off. So this will give us funding which will allow us to still support that technology within the agency. Additionally, this will give us funding which allows us to run more applications in the cloud. So every month, Microsoft sends a bill to Crayon Software that they send to us and said, here's how much compute time you've used in the cloud. This funding will allow us to migrate additional technologies out of our data center and more reliably put them into the cloud. So this request is for $1.2 million over the next 3 years to be used for these 3 purposes.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the requested resolution.
So moved.
Mr. Pond, motion. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Hardage. Having been moved and seconded, is there discussion or are there any questions? All right, let's go ahead and vote. The motion passes. Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you very much.
As LaShonda Dawkins comes forward, she's going to be presenting to us a resolution authorizing a cost of living adjustment for the retirees and drop participants of the Marta non-represented pension plan. There you go.
Good morning, Vice Chairman Durrett, Business Management Committee members, Mr. Srinath, and Mr. Parker. I'm before you this morning in my capacity as the chairman of the Marta Non-Represented Pension Plan Management Pension Committee. I'm seeking your approval and recommendation to the full Board of Directors to approve a resolution to authorize a cost of living adjustment for the retirees and drop participants of the Marta Non-Represented Pension Plan. This is expected to be paid as of January 2022, and to be eligible for the cost of living adjustment, the participant must have been a retiree and/or drop participant as of January 1st, 2021. Next slide, please. The Management Pension Committee recommends that the retirees and drop participants of the Marta Non-Represented Pension Plan receive a one-time increase to the monthly benefit based on their date of retirement on a tiered percentage basis as follows. So as you can see on the slide, if the individual had a year of retirement of 2021, there is no recommendation for an increase. Those that retired between 2018 and 2021, we're recommending 1%. Those that retired between 2012 and 2017, 2%. And all of those retirees that retired prior to 2011, 3%. There are approximately 1,431 impacted individuals. The Marta minimum required contribution will increase approximately $1,092,397 annually for 10 years, which represents the amortization of approximately $9.1 million increase to our unfunded actuarial accrued liability, as you can see on the slide. Next slide. As you may know, Marta maintains a defined benefit plan covering its non-represented employees, which was originally adopted January 1st, 1958, and currently consists of the restated plan effective January 1st, 2018. It is now a completely closed plan. It was closed to all newly hired non-represented employees in 2005, excluding police. Subsequently, it closed to newly hired police effective January 1st, 2015. Finally, as of January 1st, 2018, it has completely closed in that represented employees hired prior to 2005 that transfer into a non-represented position do not have the option to participate in the defined benefit plan covering its non-represented employees. Those individuals will go into the defined contribution plan that all employees go into post-2005. As of January 1st, 2008, retirees and drop participants were entitled to receive an automatic 1% cost of living increase. To reduce the unfunded liability of the plan, thereby producing cost savings to the authority, the Marta Board of Directors passed a resolution upon the recommendation of the Management Pension Committee authorizing the elimination of that automatic 1% COLA for retirees and drop participants in February of 2017. In accordance with the foregoing action, the Management Pension Committee committed to annually review and consider the adequacy of our retirees' pension benefits under the plan with respect to a cost of living adjustment and Marta's financial condition and ability to fund such a COLA. The terms of this commitment were memorialized in the cost of living adjustment policy. The policy was implemented to establish the procedures and guidelines for such review by the Management Pension Committee. The effective date of the COLA policy is October 12, 2017. Next slide. In accordance with our COLA policy, the Management Pension Committee, with the guidance of our plan actuaries, reviewed the rate of return for the plan year ended December 31st, 2020, our funding position of the plan before and after the COLA, and the consumer price index data for the most recent preceding 12-month period. The respective rate of return for this year, so our investment returns, was 13.41%, as compared to our actuarial assumption of 5.5%. The funded position of the plan as of December 31st, 2020 was 87%. And the CPI data reviewed was averaging around 5.39%. So after careful consideration of the respective information, the Management Committee determined that the plan had had a favorable year in 2020, which may justify approving a cost of living adjustment for our retirees and drop participants. Next slide. Therefore, I'm here today on behalf of the Pension Committee recommending that the retirees and drop participants receive a one-time increase to the monthly benefit based on their date of retirement on this tiered percentage basis. To be eligible for the COLA again, the participant must have been a retiree and or a drop participant as of January 1st, 2021. And the MARTA minimum required contribution will likely increase $1,092,397 annually for 10 years, representing the amortization of that approximate $9.1 million increase to unfunded liability. The Pension Committee is authorized to recommend cost of living adjustment increases for retirees, if warranted, to the MARTA Board of Directors for consideration. The board, in its sole discretion, will determine whether pension benefits will be increased for this cost of living adjustment. And so I conclude by respectfully requesting that this committee approve this resolution to authorize a one-time increase to the monthly benefit and make said recommendation to the full board in the upcoming meetings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Mr. Worthy makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Reggie. Discussion and questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
do we get outside analysis to support the Management Committee in going through these numbers?
Yes, sir. Our plan actuaries are external to MARTA. We use pension board consultants. They've been with us for a number of years, and we relied completely on them for the analysis.
Okay, good. And the second question, refresh my memory to qualify, how many years is there a vesting schedule? Can you just kind of summarize the qualifications and from a time served standpoint?
There is a vesting schedule, but as I mentioned, because this plan is closed, you know, all of the individuals have been in the plan for, the plan closed in 2005. So all of the people who are in the plan now mostly are retirement eligible.
Okay, thanks.
Jim?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Please.
Bill,
I interrupted you.
I apologize. Yeah, Jim?
Please.
Thank you. Real quick, just a quick question about the pension funds themselves. Who manages the funds for MARTA?
So our, you know, obviously as trustees of the board, we're responsible and have a fiduciary responsibility to do that, but we use Callan Associates to provide investment expertise to us, and they manage the various firms that handle the assets of the portfolio.
Thank you.
LaShonda, can you just mention who's on the board, who's, excuse me, a trustee? And I'll just, you mentioned this earlier, ultimately, the board of directors has the final say in matters like this. So mention the representation of the board that includes, for example, Roberta represents the MARTA board. So if you could just mention that.
Absolutely, sir. So I serve as the chair. Mr. Srinath is a member of the committee. Ms. Elizabeth O'Neill is Chief Crayer is a member of the committee. Ms. Roberta is our board representative. Who am I missing?
The retirees, the two retirees.
Most importantly, Mr. Ken Greger who is one of our retiree representatives. And for those of you who may be new to the organization, Mr. Greger has been a former general manager of MARTA. He was a former CFO of MARTA. He was a former board member of MARTA, and I believe he was a former chair of MARTA. And he has been with us and provides great guidance and vast knowledge, and is very supportive of this recommendation. And our second retiree representative is Rhonda Briggins, who formerly worked at MARTA and is a retiree.
I also offer that Ken Greger has ridden his bicycle across the United States of America several times. So.
He has, and I must say, he really wanted to be here today, but something did come up, because he definitely feels very strongly about this and wanted to be here to demonstrate that support in front of this board.
He probably got a flat tire. Bill?
I'm going to ask the obvious question. How did Marta adopt a defined benefit plan in 1958?
I guess it was our predecessor organization, because we did have employees before we were truly MARTA. I think, what was, Liz, help me out, Atlanta Transit, yes. And so we were just a bus company at that time. But we had to provide some benefits to those wonderful bus operators who got us started. Thank you for the question.
Okay, any other questions? Then let's go ahead and vote on the motion. And Bill, could I ask you to abstain for Frida, please? I don't think you're allowed to vote yes or no for. Okay, the motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for full line banking, RFP P46375. Laura Kegwin, welcome to the lectern.
Thank you. Good morning, Vice Chair Durant and members of the Business Management Committee and Mr. Parker. My name is Laura Kegwin, and I'm here to submit for your consideration a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for full line banking services, RFP 46375. Today I'm presenting the background solicitation, evaluation results, and requesting board action with relation to this contract. Next slide, please. Due to the expiration of the current contract, Marta had the need to solicit for a new banking services contract. The scope of work includes all of the cash management functions for the authority, including funds transfers. Next slide, please, sorry. Funds transfers, direct payroll deposits, Fedwire and ACH transfers, daily deposits, lockbox, safekeeping of securities, armored car services, control disbursements, and other associated services such as reporting. The contract has a term of a 3-year base and 2 one-year options. Next slide, please. Next, we will take a look at the solicitation. Marta released the RFP in the spring on March 30, 2021. The deadline for proposals for the receipt was July 9th, 2021. In the interim, proponents could ask questions of Marta's staff regarding the RFP. The RFP response saw 6 proposals being received by the deadline. Ultimately, after procurement and legal review, 4 proponents were determined to be responsive. The 4 responsive bidders were JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, US Bank, and Wells Fargo Bank. Next slide, please. The proposals were evaluated by a technical evaluation team, or TET, as well as a selection evaluation committee, or SEC, which scored the proposals. As part of the process, the TET presented their detailed input and comprehensive analysis to the SEC for consideration in their technical scores. Ultimately, each SEC member evaluated and scored the proposals from a technical perspective, which resulted in 3 of the proponents with the highest technical scores being asked to present before the evaluation team. These firms were Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo Bank. After the presentations and any adjustments to the SEC technical scoring, the proponents were shortlisted to 2 proponents, Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase. At that time, the SEC met to review combined technical and price scores, which resulted in a best and final offer, or BAFO, request and clarification questions being sent to 2 proponents. Again, Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase. Next slide, please. Finally, after the receipt of the BAFO submissions and rescoring based on any resulting price changes, the SEC determined that the proponent with the highest technical score and pricing score combined was Wells Fargo Bank. Anticipated cost of the contract for the 5-year period are not to exceed $732,742.55. Next slide, please. At this time, I would like to respectfully request of the approval of the resolution awarding the award of a contract for full-line banking services, RFP 46375, to Wells Fargo Bank, N.A.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution? Mr. Pond, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Racy. We have motion and second. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Pond?
How, this is a maximum. How is that charged? How's that invoiced to Marta on a per year, per monthly basis?
Usually it's,
What's it based on, I guess? That was my question.
well, usually they charge us per month. In the current contract, we actually incur the fee once per year. But under this new contract, I believe they will be charging us each month. And with Wells Fargo. And they net that, it's all the fees, and they net an earnings credit for that, which reduces our fees a little bit ultimately. It may, ultimately be a little less than the 732, 742.55. If interest rates go up a little bit, they're so low right now. They're not much help. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, Ray.
I have a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
The current contract, when does it expire?
We have an extension period already,
Okay.
and we've extended, I believe, till April or possibly June of the next fiscal, or this next calendar year, end of this fiscal year.
And who has the current contract?
It's currently Bank of America.
And
so it is a
in terms
change.
of transferring the services and all that, what time frame does that have to, do you need for that?
We're anticipating that we can do this in under 6 months. It will probably be much less than that, but we wanted to, build in a couple of extra months. That's why we extended from April to June on the extension with Bank of America. So, and then, that's part of one of the factors we looked at for the evaluation committee was the implementation plan of each of the financial institutions. And Wells Fargo had a sound plan for implementing a new contract, and they had a very detailed analysis and a project plan for each of our services with a timeline, and that went within that time frame.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other questions? Let's go ahead and vote on the motion. The motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we have a couple of briefings. Bill Bailey is going to brief us on Green Bond Refunding Bond Series 2021D, E1, and E2.
Mr. Director, may I make a couple of points before Bill goes through the details? I just want to highlight a couple of things. Thank you. First of all, he's going to go through the details. I just want to highlight two things. One, this is a very complex transaction, as you can see from his presentation. Best of my knowledge, the first of its kind for Marta. And there are two reasons why I'm saying the first of one, of course, the savings, which are expected to be significant. Again, Bill will go through the numbers on that. It will give you a range because pricing hasn't been done yet. Pricing will be determined on December 8th. We'll come to the full board on the 9th for approval of the pricing. And the second thing, equally important, this is the first of its kind, what's called a green bond for Marta, which kind of, recognizes or acknowledges all of the green or the sustainable initiatives that Marta has undertaken over the last how many years now and continues to do so. And also a validation by the financial community of the efforts this organization has taken towards that end. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And with that, I'll leave the heavy lifting to Bill.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Good morning, Vice Chairman Durrett, members of the Business Management Committee, Mr. Sunov, Mr. Parker. I am here to brief you on the authorities refunding bond series 21D, E1, E2 bonds. Next slide, please. Today's presentation agenda will consist of the following: background, underwriter selection, key refunding points, the tender exchange associated feature, and the next steps. Next slide, please. First, a little background on the refunding transaction. Due to changes in federal law, advanced tax-exempt bond refundings are no longer allowed. Bonds can be advanced refunding on a federally taxable basis, and we did our first one last year on the 2020B bonds. Bond series 2014A and 2015B can be refunded and achieve the required net present value savings. And as you know, we refund bonds at lowest interest rates to achieve a reduction in the interest expense cost to the authority. Underwriters can be chosen on MARTA's negotiated bond underwriting pool, and this was approved by the board last May. Next slide, please. The underwriters were selected from the approved and negotiated pool, and this pool consists of national firms, regional firms, and diverse firms. The underwriters for this transaction consist of Goldman Sachs as senior manager, JP Morgan Securities, Estrada Hinojosa, Loop Capital, and Blaylock Vaughn as co-managers. Next slide, please. These are the key refunding points of this transaction. The estimated par of $391 million. Now that's in red. These are in red. They will be adjusted due to the market rates at that time. And you'll see in the next slide, the tender exchange portion will also lower the par value of the 2021 Ds. And as Raj touched upon, I am very excited that to announce that these are MARTA's first certified green bonds. And you know, as he stated, not only will this add to MARTA's commitment to sustainability and be included in the MARTA's annual sustainability report, but this will open the bonds up to an expanded pool of investors and thus help reduce our interest rate costs as we move into these ESG bonds. Bond Series 2014A and 2015A are the refunding candidates. And because this is a negotiated transaction, we will have the advantage of pricing the bonds the day before the board date of December 9th. That'll be on the 8th. And we expect to close this transaction on December 16th. The Series 2021D bonds are expected to produce aggregate gross savings in the range of $45 million to $52 million over the life of the bonds, or a net present value savings in the range of $35 to $40 million. And in addition to this base case taxable refunding, MARTA will enhance the savings by offering a tender exchange. Next slide, please. Okay. In order to further enhance these savings, MARTA will offer a tender, which is an offer to purchase the existing 2014-2015A bonds at fair prices, or exchange, where we will offer bondholders new tax-exempt bonds at lower rates, which will become the 2021 E bonds. The tender will be E1 and the exchange will be E2. The tender exchange will enhance our savings versus the base case taxable refunding by allowing MARTA to issue these bonds on a tax-exempt status, and that will reduce the 2021 Ds. MARTA will only accept tenders or exchanges for bonds that increase savings and to reduce the debt service paid by MARTA. The remaining bonds will be refunded with the taxable refunding bond series 21D, and assuming 25% of bondholders in aggregate participate in the tender exchange, an additional amount of approximately $4 million in savings could be achieved. Next slide, please. So the next steps. Next steps in this transaction will be posting the preliminary offering statement and invitation to tender exchange That'll be done tomorrow. These tender and exchange offers are due on December 3rd. Pricing will occur on December 8th. Full board approval will be requested on December 9th. The board will be briefed on the pricing and the saving results at the board work session and with approval of the resolution requested at the board meeting itself. And this transaction is expected to close on December 16th. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Raj, do you have anything else to add?
No, Mr. Durrett, I think Bill summed it up very nicely. We'll come back to the board at the work session on December 9th and give an update on the pricing and the savings, and followed with the request for approval at the board meeting.
I'm looking forward to a nice Christmas present for Marta.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, the final item on our agenda is your briefing, Raj, the fiscal year 2022 September financial highlights and financial performance indicators.
Thank you, Mr. Durrett, members of the Business Management Committee, Mr. Parker. To add to the good news, if you could go to the next slide, first 3 months of the fiscal year turned out very well, very favorably. Both the revenues and the expenses were favorable. In other words, the revenues exceeded our budget by a little over $16 million, and coincidentally, the expenses were lower by approximately the same amount for the first 3 months. And the next slide has some of the details behind why the revenues were higher and the expenses were lower. If you could move to the next slide. Again, sales tax revenues and the ad valorem tax revenues, those were the primary contributors for the favorable variance in revenue. But one really good news, so hopefully that will become a trend going forward, even our fare revenues were slightly higher than the budget by about $2 million, so that's really good news. Even though the amount is small, definitely we'll take that. On the expense side, we continue to have pretty significant vacancies, which contributed to a pretty favorable reduction in expenses. Also, the vacancies contributed to lower wages as well as lower benefits, because that depends on the head count, as well as the number of paratransit, the ADA passengers also were lower. They're still feeling the effects of COVID-19. That also contributed to lower expenses. If you'd go to the next one. This is for the month of September. Again, the same theme. The revenues were higher for the reasons I mentioned for the quarter. Likewise, revenues were higher and the expenses were lower for the same reasons. If you'd go to the next one. And again, this is the details behind the numbers on the previous slide. The sales tax revenues were higher for the month, as well as the ad valorem taxes, and the wage and the commensurate benefits were lower. Next slide. If you can go to the next one. This is, I mentioned the passenger revenues were slightly higher, as you can see. The red line, that is the actual revenues we received for both bus and rail. And the gray bars were the budgeted numbers. So on both, we were higher compared to the budget. And yes, we were a little bit lower compared to last year, but definitely we're making some improvements on that. And if you could go to the next one, I'm going to break this down. This slide is a little bit busy. I'm going to focus on the first red and blue bar. That's the current year. In other words, the first set of bars are July 21 actual numbers. The bars next to that, which is the light blue and perhaps the salmon color bar, is the last year comparison. So likewise, the first 3 months, the combined bus and rail ridership has increased compared to last year's. However, if you go to the next slide, there's a slight divergence between bus ridership and rail ridership. Bus has still lagged, except for the month of September, when we saw a slight increase in bus ridership compared to last September. However, July and August were still lower compared to last year's. Whereas if you go to the next slide, the Rail information is very different. All 3 months we have exceeded last year's ridership, which is what contributed to higher passenger revenues. If you go to the next one, I believe that concludes my presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions? Looking good. Keep us solvent. All right, anything else to come before the committee? In that case, I'll bang the imaginary gavel. We are adjourned. All right, thanks.